Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Rapid Recap on the Inside Nebraska YouTube channel. I'm Zack Carpenter, he's Steve Marik. Today, Nebraska had its 5th spring practice and 2nd open practice of the spring, so we got our second 40-minute window at the beginning of practice, and today's setup was quite a bit different today in terms of what we're able to see. It was structured when we were in there of long stretching period. Matt Rhule had a long talk, a little speech to the team, talking about challenging them to be more united and bring more intensity. And then they broke off into a lot of special teams work. And so only the last 5 to 7 minutes of practice that we were in there for was broken up into individual offensive and defensive drills. But still, in that entire time frame, 40 minutes or even that last 5 to 7 minutes, Steve, what was your number one takeaway from today?
Well, I was gonna stick with one, but I'm gonna go two. I remember I just liked it that it was really cold out there. It was like 25 degrees. You saw the players' breath, and it just, for a coaching staff who has talked about wanting to play in the elements, play in meaningful conference games in November, they got a similar version of that today. I mean, it was really cold out there, and just to see guys running around with the breath coming out of their helmets, it just kind of looked like fall, even though it's definitely not fall. So, but my top observation, Nerden Nueli, the offensive lineman, Norris high school grad from just south of Lincoln, originally from Germany. He was suspended last season. He was probably going to be a starter at one of the guard spots. He's back out there for spring practices, and I don't know, I think he looked good. And don't take it from me, take it from Donovan Rhule, the offensive line coach. There was a lot of good jobs. There was just a lot of high praise for Nerden Nueli, who was just doing a lot of good things with his practice reps. And also a kind of a cool thing that I saw also was Ethan Piper, another guy who's a strong candidate to maybe start at one of those 2 guard spots and maybe even be the backup center behind Ben Scott. He was really doing a good job, I think, of showing leadership. It's his 5th year in the program, coming out of Norfolk Catholic, and he took Justin Evans Jenkins, who's another kind of young, growing center in the program, and showed him the correct way to do like a technique during a drill. So I thought that was kind of cool. So those are my two observations. I tried a lot to stay with the offensive linemen and just kind of see what they were doing today. And yeah, Nuri was doing pretty well out there, I think.
Oh, perfectly well, perfectly on brand for you to be focused on the offensive line. I think that's Steve's probably number behind nickel, probably the number 2 personnel group that you like to follow.
It's an important position. It's an important position, yeah, and it's fun. The offensive line matters so much to this program's history, and I think it matters so much to Marcus Satterfield's offense. And like I mentioned on the message board at Inside Nebraska all the time, we can talk about the quarterbacks until we're blue in the face. We can talk about all the cool running backs, all the wide receivers, all these awesome tight ends. But if the offensive line doesn't come together and take a step forward from what they showed last season, none of that's going to matter, really. So, yeah, I do like to keep an eye on the offensive line. And today I really enjoyed doing that.
I love talking about the quarterbacks and running backs.
Yeah.
As you know, I like the cool star positions and corners. Speaking of the running backs, Anthony Grant, running back who was previously suspended from practice, he was back out there. So Anthony Grant and Tommy Hill, originally suspended, are back practicing. Tommy was already practicing last week during open practice, but Anthony Grant back out there today. That's one of the observations I had. Last week I was focused on the offense, you were focused on the defense. Today we flip-flopped, and like I said already, didn't get as extensive of a look into both sides of the ball. But during that short period at the end where I was looking at the defense, there were 3 groups, 3 personnel groups, going from station to station, going in circuits. One was being run by Terrence Knighton, defensive line coach, who was working with them on attacking blocks, taking on blocks, shedding them, powering through, and ripping through to get to a ball carrier. Linebackers coach Rob Dvorak, he was working on form tackling, and secondary coach Evan Cooper, I think he was working mostly on footwork stuff, backpedaling, that sort of thing. But what I noticed was that they were the 3 groupings were all mixed together with defensive linemen and the edge outside linebacker types, inside linebackers, and safeties, cornerbacks. There was all kind of a hodgepodge all mixed together. And I was taking a look at the three groupings they had. And in one group, there's the guys that we all think either are returning starters from last year or guys we expect to either start or have a significant role in this defense all in one group. Obviously, Ty Robinson, Blaze Gunnarsson are still out of spring ball, but you had Nash Hutmacher, along with a couple freshmen, Principal, Uman Yellen, Cameron Lenhart. And then you have, Nash Hutmacher, Chief Borders, MJ Sherman, Luke Reimer, Quentin Newsom, Malcolm Hartzog, Miles Farmer, Omar Brown, a couple other guys.
There's a lot of starts
mixed
in that group.
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, that's notable. And then the other groups, I mean, you have a couple other guys like Jamari Butler or others who we expect to see, we could see a significant role from, but it was pretty obvious that group was loaded. And so that's why at the end of the press conference with Matt Rhule after the practice, I asked for some clarity about, are these defensive groupings for those individual periods, are they already separated as 1s, 2s, and 3s, or how are those separated? And he said, no, they're just going through defensive circuits. It's funny that he said they're not grouped into 1s, 2s, and 3s, but we do have an A, B, and C group. So semantically speaking, I think that's how they were grouped. But he said those change, those fluctuate, because right now, he said normally you would have them grouped together as the bigs, the linebackers, and the DBs as three separate groups. But I heard you laugh at this when he said it during the press conference. I heard a slight snicker from you when he said, we have more defensive backs than any team in the country right now. Because he was saying it like maybe they do, maybe they don't, but it was underlining a point that he keeps saying we have a ton of defensive backs. So that's why he said couldn't separate them into those three groups like you normally would, but still that grouping was telling, but it also is kind of lining up with what we think is going to wind up being the top of the line of the defensive depth chart. Even though he said, I can't even think about putting together a depth chart until the fall, which is what we expect.
That's what I was going to say. Is I'm glad that Rhule put that out there because he did say that I can't even think about a depth chart right now. They're using this spring to experiment with guys, as we'll talk about soon here with a couple of them, and if anybody wants to try to say, oh, these guys are in these positions in these drills and that's the depth chart, I really doubt that's the case. There's a lot of football left to be practiced and a whole fall camp and a whole summer to go. So I'm glad that Rhule put that out there. That the depth chart really isn't a thing right now, I don't think.
Coming from the guy who spent hours on a pre-spring depth chart that I made him put together.
Maybe I should send it Rhule's way and see what he says.
Yeah, maybe be spot on or pretty accurate so far. And then the defensive groupings, that was notable. But the other thing, Jeff Sims, the quarterback grouping, they were throwing a little bit. We got like a small snippet of throws, but nothing spectacular. He spoke at the podium after. He called Casey Thompson a natural-born leader. And again, the update on Casey is that there's not really an update yet.
Nope, no update.
He still hasn't been throwing, other than like a couple flips here and there, but not throwing, still in a yellow jersey. Rhule talked about how impressed, and there's no timetable, there's no exact date yet. They talked about progressions last week for Casey Thompson, but still no exact date, still not throwing. Rhule talked about how impressed he's been with Jeff Sims throughout spring ball. We're still seeing some of the same things, I think. Physically, nothing's changed since last week. And then with the running backs, I don't know if there's a main takeaway from you other than mine for the running backs is Emmett Johnson. I think he could be used. He was with Josh Fleeks. Those two guys were the first up in the kick return drills, followed by Billy Kemp and Ramir Johnson. But Fleeks and Emmett were the top two in that group, and Rhule talked about at the presser that he really likes Emmett, his game. I think he could be a special teams contributor, but just overall with the running backs, what did you see?
Yeah, I think Matt Rhule really likes Emmett Johnson, and we know that Emmett Johnson might not. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, nothing against Emmett Johnson, but I don't think he has kind of the talent that others in the running back room do right now. Now, Emmett Johnson is a super young player, and he can obviously develop into that. But I think what Emmett Johnson could really do well for himself is on special teams, and I think Matt Rhule sees that as kind of a young guy who's willing to do anything to get on the field and impress. And once you can do that, it opens doors for the offense too. And if Emmett Johnson could be a potential punt returner or a kick returner on this team, I think that's awesome for him.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's going to wind up cracking the two deep or get too heavily into the rotation. Exactly, but I do think the coaching staff and Rhule especially are impressed with him. And I know you said he's not as talented physically, but I do think there is something there of just he sees, he has good vision, and he's able to sort of dissect things quickly, which is so imperative in that
he was an excellent
quarter
player.
of a second that you get the handoff and you're going.
He was an excellent player in the high school ranks in Minnesota, and he had the ball in his hand a lot as a high schooler. So yeah, he has a lot of experience doing it, and I definitely would think that he has vision would be one of his good traits there.
Yeah, and then our next open practice we're going to be at is next Tuesday, April 4th. Putting you on a spot here, there's one guy. We'll probably split it up again where you're taking offense, I'm taking defense, or we're figuring it out right now on the podcast. You're knowing that now. If we do wind up splitting it up that way, either offense or defense, though, honestly, it doesn't matter. Who's like one guy that you're really excited to watch, like put a spotlight on? Honestly,
it's the tight ends. Marik Gilbert, he's not limited at all. He's been out there. Just a giant, massive human being, and if you go watch his LSU tape from his true freshman season, he was an all freshman SEC timber, kind of good. But yeah, the Tigers were using him as a legit wideout, and they were using him as a hybrid tight end. He was inline, he was offline, he was just doing a whole bunch of different things. Now, he wasn't 270 or 280 pounds like he is right now, and I'm wondering if the coaching staff actually wants him that high, but that's who I'm out of everybody on the offense. I mean, Jeff Sims, we can talk about the quarterbacks. That's kind of a given in my opinion. But out of everybody, I'm looking at Marik Gilbert and just thinking about like what he could be in this offense. He could, is he willing to stick his nose in the fan and be a tough Big Ten run blocking tight end who can also go out and be a mismatch nightmare in the passing game? I think that's possible. So I just want to go out there and see him, honestly. I want to see more of Marik Gilbert.
One thing that just popped in my mind, that an interesting stat with Gilbert at LSU that season, 24 of his 32 catches went for either a first down or a touchdown.
Really? That's pretty good.
And so that popped out like, all right, he's a dependable chains mover. And they got a couple of them on this team, of Marik Gilbert and Billy Kemp, who was a notorious chains mover. And we talked about him plenty as a guy who can be used in that short to intermediate passing game or behind the line of scrimmage with those jet passes.
There's not more of a surefire, positive impact, instant impact guy of the transfer additions than Billy Kemp, in my opinion. I think that guy is going to step onto the field day one and be a contributor, and potentially, I've said this before, but lead the team in receptions. I could definitely see somebody like that doing that.
That is my prediction for that receiver group, is that Billy Kemp is going to lead the team in receptions. I mean, it's not even that. It's not much of a bold prediction because of the way that we expect to use him.
Look at what he did at Virginia. Look at what Marcus Satterfield is saying. He wants this offense to be positionless offense, where a guy can play multiple roles. Billy Kemp did exactly that at Virginia, and I just think that he's going to step into Lincoln, step into this program right here, and just be that all-everything wideout that Marcus Satterfield can kind of play with.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this before too. He's that number one candidate to me. Maybe he doesn't wind up being a true number one receiver in like the traditional sense of the word. I just think he's the number one candidate to be whoever the starting quarterback is. He's the number one candidate to be their favorite target because
security
of how,
blanket too.
Yep, how reliable he is, and security blanket, like you said. Last thing that we completely buried, sort of a lead here that we didn't talk about.
Gray jerseys out of the way.
Yeah, there were players in green jerseys to signify they're limited in practice. Yellow jerseys say they're injured, they're out right now. So those guys were over doing stationary bike work, jogging, stretching. And then there were two guys today that we saw for the first time in gray jerseys. It was A.J. Rollins, tight end, and Jaleel Martin, defensive back. And those gray jerseys signify that those players are now practicing both ways, so on offense and defense. So Jaleel Martin, defensive back, was practicing at wide receiver, and A.J. Rollins, tight end, is not practicing at defensive line as well.
Defensive line, yeah. Really interesting stuff from Matt Rhule, and we've seen this with him wanting to tinker and tailor with different guys' positions. And next up is A.J. Rollins and Jaleel Martin. So Rhule did mention, and he mentioned this with Ramir Johnson too, who worked a little bit at slot receiver today. They did have some, I think, some nicks and bruises with some wide receivers who weren't able to practice on Tuesday. So that's kind of a big reason why Ramir Johnson went and practiced with the receivers, and Jaleel Martin went and practiced with the receivers. So that might have had to play with it. But
and that defensive backs group that we talk about.
A lot of defensive backs. But yeah, A.J. Rollins, I mean, a lot of in-state Husker fans from Nebraska know about him. Creighton Prep product, played in a big run-heavy offense at Creighton Prep, so he did a lot of blocking. So, I mean, the path for playing time at tight end with A.J. Rollins, I don't know if it was that clear. I don't know if it's that easy to see for a guy like him. But on the defensive side, I don't really know what to think. I mean, it's intriguing to say the least. I mean, he's 6'6", he's around 225 pounds. So that's he looks like an edge defender for sure. So, I mean, that's just another kind of interesting position move that Rhule is doing and seeing if it works. Now, it's not set in stone yet. Obviously, A.J. Rollins can go and take reps at tight end as well. Same thing with Jaleel Martin over at safety. So, just two interesting additions with the gray jerseys, which was obviously the first time that we saw that at practice.
I feel really good about myself after we were seeing that, and I'm like, I wonder if that means that they're playing both ways. After I saw Rollins in that defensive grouping, I'm like, I wonder if that's what that means. Rhule confirmed that, and I just did like a little mini fist bump in my head. I'm like, all right, I'm on to something here.
I didn't even know what I was running through it in my head. I'm like, what could this mean? I didn't know.
Look at that, I'm smarter at football than Steve. Look at that. He's gonna take so much offense to that.
No.
I know you said about the position changes, and Rhule said that there's nothing else no other position changes have been made yet, but he said he could see that happening in the near future, which we'll get, like I said, our next chance to check that out next Tuesday, April 4th, at the next open practice. And then we also have more press conferences coming on Thursday, which you can check out written content from us and the rest of the Inside Nebraska team at nebraska.rivals.com. And make sure to lock it into the Inside Nebraska YouTube channel. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to that, so you can get the videos dropped directly into your feed. So again, busy week, busy next few days coming. We'll have it all covered here. So for Steve Marik, I'm Zack Carpenter, and we'll catch you guys again next time.